relating to a reference to the Economics References Committee.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Madam Acting Deputy President. I move the motion. This is a motion without emotion. One Nation is proposing an inquiry into the impact of high mass immigration levels on the Australian economy. We just want the pure facts and the data to be communicated to the Australian public. No labels, no smears, just data and facts. We love data. Over the weekend, tens of thousands of Australians marched asking for an answer on this question. What is the cost of adding millions of people to Australia's population in just a few short years? That's their question. I'll repeat it. What is the cost of adding millions of people to Australia's population in just a few short years? If the data shows that immigration is our strength, then let the Australian people see for themselves. Let those cards fall where they may. I can guarantee what you'll hear from the Greens and Labor on this sensible inquiry. I could almost write their speeches. For them, they're so predictable. If you have a question about whether allowing somewhere around 2.4 million new arrivals into the country over 4 years has an impact on the country, that's a question. If you wonder whether that has an impact on our schools, our rent prices, the congestion on our roads, our healthcare system, our house prices, guess what? The Greens and Labor say that asking those questions makes you a racist and a neo-Nazi, worthy of slurs, smears and labels. The Greens say that asking whether having 2.9 million temporary visa holders in the country right now, taking up to 1 million homes, is 100% in our country's interest. The Greens say that makes you a racist and a neo-Nazi. Welcome to millions of Australians that you're tagging as racist and neo-Nazi. The Greens and Labor are lying. They are scared of the conversation because the facts are devastating. The facts. So the Greens and Labor try to shut down the conversations, smearing everyone as a racist, neo-Nazi, a xenophobe. So every time you hear Labor, Greens and even some Liberals try to shut down this conversation, calling anyone who loves this country a racist, remember what we're actually voting on here. This is what my motion proposes. I am moving that the following matter be referred to the Economics References Committee for inquiry and report by 1st of May 2026. The terms of reference specify, and I'll quote, the impact of high immigration levels on the Australian economy, with particular reference to home prices, rental prices and rental vacancy rates. B, the wage pricing index. C, the inflation rate. D, labour productivity growth. E, the accuracy of government projections on immigration numbers. And F, any other related matters. That's it. No emotion, no judgments. We just want the facts and figures so the public is informed. So I'll read that again. The scope, the impact of high immigration levels on the Australian economy with particular reference to 6 specified factors. If you want to argue for the current program of mass immigration, show us your data. I say to the Greens and Labor, prove to the Australian people that having millions upon millions of extra people in the country in the middle of a housing crisis and a cost of living crisis is justified, necessary and makes sense. Calling the tens of thousands of Australians who came out and marched for our living standards and to ensure that we hand on a better country to our children, calling them racist is a disgraceful slur. I'll say that again. Calling tens of thousands of Australians who came out and marched for our living standards and to ensure that we hand on a better country to our children racist is a disgraceful slur. Every senator in this chamber should be ashamed to repeat it, yet you will. So let's have a look at terms of reference A. Home prices, rental prices and rental vacancy rates. This motion is purely about the numbers. That's it. So let's look at the numbers. We know from Home Affairs data that excluding the 300,000 plus tourists and crew, there are 2.9 million temporary migrants in the country right now, known as temporary visa holders. 2.9 million, more than 10% of our population. This excludes millions of permanent visa holders or permanent residents, as they are known. The Bureau of Statistics says that the average household size in Australia is 2.5 people per dwelling. That means on average data, the temporary migrants in this country could be taking up to 1 million houses in Australia. 1 million houses. Let's have a think about the effect that might be having on the rental market. As of July, there are just 38,000 rental vacancies in the entire country. The national rental vacancy rate is at just 1.2%, massively under the 3% rate considered healthy, less than half. In Brisbane, the rental vacancy rate is 0.9%. In Perth, 0.7%. In Adelaide, 0.8%. In Darwin, 0.5%. In Hobart, 0.6%. There's a demonstrable and strong link between the rate of non-permanent migrants and rent increases. I can provide the reference if you need it. So if your rent has gone up in the last 4 years as the mass migration program continued, there are 2.9 million reasons why. Again, I call on Labor and the Greens, if you have data to debate these numbers, put them forward at the inquiry. Don't just label or slur everyone. Deal with the facts. I know it's not easy for you, but deal with the facts. The wage price index. The impact of high immigration is felt on the employment market. Extra retail spending from new arrivals increases employment in the retail sector, partially offsetting the job loss from online sales, which are increasingly being fulfilled through regional fulfilment centres using a high degree of automation. Since the Albanese government was elected, real household per capita spending has fallen 8 points. Australian households have less, a hell of a lot less. Are we dividing the national pie into smaller and smaller pieces because the economy cannot grow as fast as our population is growing? The data suggests this is the case. So let's find out. The bad news in this picture is this. Immigrants provide a pool of labour who are happy to take an ABN, Australian Business Number, and work fee for service, often meaning low fees and low service. This undermines employment conditions and award wages that have protected everyday Australians for generations. And this is apparently okay with the unions who never question the erosion of wages coming from a large influx of new arrivals into the labour market, the former party of the worker. The evidence for this statement is found in the increase in ABNs during the Albanese government. Hundreds of thousands of new ABNs issued to new arrivals. These people... Want to continue your conversation?
Sorry, Senator Roberts. Sorry, I couldn't hear. Oh, I'm sorry about that. Senator Roberts, you have the call.
Can you address the Greens, please, Mr. Acting Deputy President? They just said that they were trying to block out my conversation.
All right. Sorry, Senator Roberts, I didn't hear that. If that's the case, I will say to the colleagues, if that is the case, I just urge people, please, that we all be heard in silence. Thank you. Senator Roberts.
The evidence for this statement is found in the increase in ABNs during the Albanese government. Hundreds of thousands of new ABNs issued to new arrivals. These people then work, issue an invoice which includes GST, then they keep all the money, send a chunk overseas, $11 billion a year chunk, mind you, and then go home or otherwise turn into someone else, another ABN. The measure the ATO uses is not ABNs issued. No, instead, the ATO uses active ABNs, people who actually submit their BAS statement and pay the GST they've collected. Why doesn't the ATO tell us how many ABNs are outstanding? What a great way of hiding the problem. Cheating the system allows that person to work for less yet have more. Work for less yet retain more. They're not contributing taxes. How many jobs, how much income tax and GST on those earnings are lost to this scam every year? I would suggest it's in the millions, and the inquiry should ask that same question. And how many people who are marching on the streets to protect the livelihoods of their kids in the future are funding these people? The Reserve Bank has advanced the argument that low-skilled arrivals reduce wages for our low-skilled workers, while skilled migration grows the pie for everyone. Skilled migration. I'm a migrant. I've got nothing against migration, but we have to have it under control and not mass migration. A New Zealand paper looked at this in depth and found the same thing, with the skill level at which the person makes a positive contribution being either a trade qualification or a university degree. The study found the difference in earnings persisted across their entire working life, suggesting language and culture actually matter. And that's what the people yesterday were saying in the streets of the capital cities and other provincial cities. Research from Denmark indicates migrants being paid lower wages persists across multiple generations. Clearly, if a company can pay lower wages or lower contractor payments to migrants, it will. If they need to force them to get an ABN to receive that lower income, it will. And if the ATO lets them do that because this is not being policed, it will. This is a serious issue because the Economics Committee must inquire into it. So let's have a look at labour productivity growth. The government pretends it supports higher productivity, yet they'll never mention migration in relation to productivity. This is despite immigration having a direct impact on productivity through capital shallowing. My colleague Senator Whitten is going to address this point in detail, so stay tuned for his explanation of why we need to look at term C in the terms of reference, labour productivity growth. Next, the accuracy of government projections on immigration numbers. This term of reference in relation to the accuracy of government projections on immigration numbers is vital. For the last 5 years, the Australian public has been completely gaslit on immigration forecasts. The Department of Treasury in every budget has released immigration forecasts that were patently wrong, repeatedly. They're either so grossly incompetent in making these forecasts that Australia should be terrified these people are in charge of our economy, or they deliberately hid the extent of the mass immigration program from Australia. In 2022-2023, Treasury said we could expect 235,000 people to arrive under net overseas migration. We got 535,520 people arrived, more than double, 225% above. That's a pretty big error. In 2023-24, Treasury said we could expect 235,000 people to arrive. 445,640 people arrived, almost double. In 2024-25, Treasury forecast net overseas migration would be 260,000. They then increased that to 340,000 halfway through the year. Data indicates the number for the year might be well over 400,000. Finance columnist Alan Kohler of the ABC lays it out quite well. On top of the forecasts, which are already extremely high historically, at least 800,000 more people than Treasury expected arrived to live in Australia in just 4 years. 4 years. That's more than 3 extra Hobarts added to Australia's population over just 4 years, above what the Treasury forecast. That's not the size of the incoming migrant. That is the size of the error. 800,000, 3 Hobarts in error. How the hell can people plan around the country? That's an unexpected shortfall of 320,000 houses above Treasury forecasts. The conduct of the Treasury demonstrates the government is unwilling to have an honest discussion with the Australian public about how many people will come into this country each year. That's what this inquiry is for, to lay out the data and the numbers and have an honest conversation with the Australian public about what the hell's going on. That's all we want. And to the people who marched on the weekend, thank you for standing up for the country, drawing attention to this, because these people would not be interested if it wasn't for you. Thank you.
Senator, I'll go to Senator Hanson-Young, Senator Kenzie, because she did pop up before you. Then I'll come back this side of the chamber. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you, Mr Acting Deputy President. I wish to contribute to this discussion. I'm appalled that after the displays yesterday of members of far-right neo-Nazi groups, of sovereign citizens decrying that the cop killer, Desi Freeman, was somehow some type of martyr and hero, that we get into this chamber today and hear that rubbish from One Nation. I mean, I'm sorry, but there are 2 dead policemen. Their families are suffering. The communities that they live in are shell-shocked. And rather than being the bigger people in this place, you have One Nation come in here and legitimise it. It's disgusting and it's revolting. And One Nation have created their entire political...
Sorry, Senator Hanson-Young, sorry. Senator Roberts, on a point of order.
Point of order, the relevance, because we have very terrible murders of 2 policemen before the marches. Had nothing to do with the marches.
Senator Roberts,
This is ridiculous.
Senator Roberts, you don't have a point of order. Senator Hanson-Young.
I have not heard the leader of One Nation or any members of One Nation in this place condemn the murder, the cold-blooded murder of those police officers, and condemn the actions of that group.
Senator Hanson-Young, just resume your seat. Senator Roberts, on a point of order, not a debate, I hope.
Relevance.
What is
We
your
have
point?
condemned the heinous murder of 2 policemen.
I'll take that as a comment. Senator Hanson-Young.
Thank you. Coming in here today to legitimise the glorification of this cop killer should be beneath any of us. And sadly, it's not. And this is because One Nation have built their entire political foundation on fear-mongering, division, and not just pseudo-law, but pseudo-maths, pseudo-science, and now pseudo-economics. The only reason that One Nation exists is because they continue to whip up fear and division in our communities. They're like a toxic algae that feeds on this fear and division. They're like a disease that loves preying on the weak.
Senator Hanson-Young, just resume your seat. Senator Winton.
I don't
On
like
a
being
point of
referred
order.
to as a disease or toxic algae.
There is no point of order, but I will just remind senators that if we are reflecting on fellow senators, I will have to call you out. At this stage, Senator Hanson-Young, you have the call.
Thank you. There are members of our community who are worried about the cost of housing, the cost of living, how they're going to cover next month's bills. And dealing with those issues in a responsible way, holding government to account where they need to be held to account, asking the questions of bureaucrats that are legitimate and need to be asked, is what this place is meant to do. But using vulnerable members of our community and migrants as a scapegoat for inequality is pathetic, it's cheap politics, and it's weak. And that's what One Nation does. And that's what this motion is all about. Now, I would have thought that after this weekend's rallies, the display and the glorification of people who have killed police officers, of the glorification of neo-Nazis, that there would be some reflection on what this is doing to our community and our society. But the only reflection we seem to be getting from One Nation today is they're rubbing their hands in glee and wanting more of it. They are feeding on this nastiness, on this division, on this fear. I mean, if they had it their way, we would have the race riots that the US have had here in Australia. They'd be cheering it on. We are not America. Australia is built on multiculturalism. Our nation is diverse. But you can't take that for granted. We can't take it for granted. It has to be, it's something that you nurture and look after and protect. We don't always agree on everything, of course not. That's why we're a democracy. We're able to debate things. We should be able to debate things without sinking to the level of dividing people by the colour of their skin or where they were born. Which brings me to the other person. In the other place, Mr. Bob Katter, who I think today showed a total lack of judgment about doubling down on his aggressive threat of violence to an Australian journalist for simply asking about his immigration policies and his background. Now, I put it to you that if this was any other member in this place, this wouldn't just be laughed off as Bob Katter, that's him. Mr. Katter's behaviour on Friday, threatening violence to a journalist for simply asking a question, is unacceptable. And he should either apologise or resign. He's simply, the idea of doubling down on this means he's missed the point. And I would have thought that since the weekend's horror show, that he may have reflected a little bit on his own contribution to whipping up these fears and division, but he clearly hasn't. And so tonight I say, Mr. Katter should apologise to that journalist or he should step down. If we start in this country down the road where politicians can threaten violence at journalists for asking pesky questions they don't like, or individuals shooting dead cops and that not being called out, in fact glorified, then we are heading down a very, very dangerous path. And I don't for any moment suggest that any one party or any one person in this place has it right all the time. I don't believe we do. But I do think that the last few days, the last week's incidents, whether it's the shooting of innocent police officers, the threatening of journalists, the glorification of neo-Nazi politics on our streets, I think we have a moment right now where we have to think about what kind of country we want to be. And I tell you what, it's not this. This is not the type of future we want for Australia. And I respectfully ask One Nation to stop using vulnerable people and migrants as whipping boys and girls and scapegoats.
Senator McKenzie.
Thank you, Mr. Acting Deputy President. Well, we often speak in this chamber about economic growth as though GDP alone tells the story of our nation's success. But GDP is not a measure of whether young Australians can own a home, start a family or build a secure life. It counts money changing hands. It counts population growth. It doesn't count the stress of housing insecurity or the heartbreak of delaying children because you just can't afford a place big enough to raise them. When the fundamentals of ordinary life become unattainable for the next generation, economic policy is failing at its most basic purpose. Over the past 3 years, Labor has brought in over 1 million migrants, and unless there is respite, it will approach 2 million in 5 years. This includes 536,000 in 22-23, the highest intake in our history, 446,000 in 23-24. And to put that into perspective, we've added the equivalent of the entire population of Brisbane in just 3 years. But we haven't built a city like Brisbane to house, feed, employ, educate these additional people. That is population scale growth on a scale our housing market, our infrastructure, our planning system, our hospitals, our schools, our communities are not prepared for. Even in the 24-25 budget papers, there's an admission that net overseas migration will remain above the long-run average for years to come. And the result is a housing market in crisis, a market that caters for those young people who are fortunate enough to have parents or grandparents wealthy enough to help them out with a deposit. In the early 2000s, the house price to income ratio sat at around 4. Today, that is over 8 nationally. In Sydney, it is among the least affordable in the world, now exceeding 14 times the median wage. It means teachers, nurses, police officers, clerical workers can't afford to live anywhere close to where they work. The median dwelling price to income ratio nationwide has jumped to 9.6. It was 9.6 in 2000 to 16.4 in 2024. Economist Alan Kohler has warned that if the ratio had stayed where it was in 2000, around the 4, Australian families would be paying half as much for their mortgages as they are today. Instead, mortgage repayments now chew up over 50% of household incomes, compared with 36% 2 decades ago. The median Sydney house price has doubled from $680,000 in 2014 to about $1.4 million today. This is not sustainable. It is shutting a generation out of home ownership entirely. And the social impacts go even further. As Ross Giddens recently posed, have we arrested the development of our young? Danielle Wood, Jim Chalmers' own head of the Productivity Commission, has warned that Australia is in danger of breaking the generational bargain, the promise that each generation would live better than the one before. And the statistics are sobering. The proportion of young Australians not yet married has doubled from 26% to 53%. The median age of first marriage has risen from 27 to 34. Among 25 to 39-year-olds, the proportion living as a couple has collapsed from over half to just 1/5. A Deloitte analysis of the census found that more than half of Australians aged between 18 to 25 now even believe they are unlikely ever to have children. These are not just lifestyle choices. These are economic constraints forcing people to delay or abandon entirely the most fundamental decision of adulthood. And let's be honest about who benefits and who loses. High immigration feeds the interests of big business, which wants more workers and more consumers to just keep driving that economy. It feeds big universities, which rely heavily on international student revenue. And it feeds big government, which grows larger with every extra million people to regulate and serve. But the costs of this, so that's who benefits, but the cost of these policy settings are borne by young Australians, locked out of home ownership, young couples delaying marriage and children, young families struggling to pay rent or save a deposit while prices climb faster than they can ever possibly catch up on. Every child not born today is another job, another taxpayer that needs to be filled by skilled migration over the next 20 years. We're drifting towards a society where home ownership depends entirely on whether your parents can help you out, where home ownership comes increasingly from inheritance, not from hard work, where the idea of starting a family depends less on aspirational love than on whether you can even afford a house with a backyard. Ross Gittins again has written, a society that tells its young people they cannot buy a home unless their parents are rich is a society that's lost its way. And herein lies the irony of the heart of the debate. We're told we need high immigration because the birth rate is too low. But the birth rate is falling partly because housing costs are too high, because family formation is delayed further each year, because our young Australians can't get on with ordinary life. We're using migration to fix a problem that migration itself is making worse. And that I want to be really clear that this is not an argument against migration. Migration has built modern Australia. And if you are not Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, then we're all migrants, whether your family came here 5 generations ago or 5 weeks ago. Migration has brought skills, diversity and energy that has made us the prosperous. Chair, I'm
Order,
finding it.
I just resume your seat, Senator Mackenzie. Colleagues, as much as I'm loath to depress debate, but it is consistent, and I will ask that the senator be heard in silence. Senator Mackenzie.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Migration in the 20th century achieved great things like the Snowy Mountains scheme, but it came with great sacrifice from the migrants themselves, many of whom came here to work, living in camps and dongas while they were built. Entrepreneurial migrants from across the globe have built this great country. And indeed, I was in Mandurah just this last weekend speaking to two young men from the Punjab who'd chosen to buy a business in this country town in WA, raise their families, and were excited about the opportunity that our country provided them. And they made a point of discussing with me in this small town conversation about the common values that they shared with Australia, and that not all migrants do share those common values, do not want to see a prosperous, sustainable and sovereign Australia going forward, and that we do need to be careful about who comes to this country, how many come to this country, and where they live. And so having a conversation, a rational, respectful conversation through a Senate inquiry in our Economics Committee, whose terms of reference are quite benign, should be welcomed. And then, if you don't agree with Senator Roberts' motion, you can actually bring witnesses to that inquiry, have the open debate. It's public, in a respectful way, chaired by whoever's chairing the Economics Committee today. And I'm sure they'd do a fabulous job. So there's nothing to be afraid of about having this debate. It says more about those opposed to this motion, that they're concerned that there's something nefarious about what is the impact. Let's understand the impact so we can stop having these rhetorical arguments about the heavy migration impact that Labor's imposed on our community. Because I believe that migration must be calibrated to the nation's capacity. Its capacity to build housing, its capacity to provide infrastructure, water, roads, its capacity to ensure that young Australians aren't pushed aside in their own country. Economic growth that drives GDP up while home ownership, family formation and fertility rates fall is growth that is failing the very people it should serve. The question for Parliament is simple. Do we want a country where the next generation can own a home, start a family, get on with ordinary life? Because if we can't deliver the basics, then all of us are failing in the most basic of responsibilities that we have, to actually leave the next generation off better than the last. And then I said in Western Australia at the National Party State Conference this weekend, when you can't expect to partner, get a home, have some kids and do all the normal things that have meant humanity has grown, prospered and progressed over centuries and millennia, we really do have a problem. And we shouldn't actually be scared about having the conversation, no matter how much certain senators detest one nation, right? The actual substantive motion itself is quite a sensible debate that's overdue in this country. Instead, we're turning to high immigration to actually solve the problems of a birth rate so low. There are deeper cultural problems about not being able to just get on and do regular life. We've got to solve that problem. That's the nut we actually have to crack. Let's start first with a sensible migration number, a number that we can actually have the capacity as a country to service so that we're not getting waiting queues in our public hospitals, so that we can deliver high-quality public education to everyone, that you actually don't have to wait for an hour and a half in your car to get to work because you can't afford to live near your... I know WA is very different. You've got beautiful roads over there, but come to the East Coast, Senator Steele, John. If you are living in the peri-urban sections of Melbourne, Sydney and Brisbane because you cannot afford a house if you're a teacher, a nurse, a police officer or a bank teller, then there is a problem. And I'm happy to introduce you to any of these people who struggle with this. We need to make sure that people who share our values, values such as individual liberty and dignity, every person's equal worth, freedom of faith and expression, including the freedom not to believe, with the right to speak and associate peacefully, values about upholding the law, where we actually have one law for all citizens, accountable to the courts, democratic self-government, laws made by elected parliaments, not by religious or secular codes outside democracy, the fair go of mutual respect, tolerance, empathy for the disadvantaged and equality of opportunity for everyone, the values around English as our unifying national language, equal opportunities for all regardless of where you live, your ethnicity or your national origin. Those who share these values and who want to help build a safe, sustainable and prosperous Australia should be welcome. But those who denigrate and despise those values, we should have the right as a country and indeed a responsibility to the next generation to say, no, you are not welcome here. In a country as developed, welcoming, kind and rich as Australia, we're top of the pops of people from all over the world who seek a better life for their families. And so it is beholden to those of us who hold the government benches, the immigration portfolio, who get to make these decisions, to make sure that the people that we do welcome in to help us build this country share those values, because we have the opportunity to have a choice. We want people who love our country as much as we do, who believe that nation statehood is a thing. Globalists, we don't want so much. Because to be a patriot of Australia, no matter where and how you've come to this place, like the young men from the Punjab I spoke to in Mandurah on the weekend, we actually want to welcome those people, and those who don't share those values can go try live somewhere else. So the National Party will be supporting Senator Roberts' motion so that the Economics Committee can actually examine these issues in a rational, calm and respectful manner. Thank you.
Senator Askey.
Thank you. I just wish to move an amendment which has been circulated in the chamber in the name of Senator Cash in relation to the business of the Senate number 1, and just make sure that that is on the record. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Askey. Senator Stewart.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. Well, I rise today to oppose this disgraceful motion, referral, whatever you want to call it. It's dog whistling dressed up as an inquiry. That's all that it is. It gives a platform to people who want to punch down on migrants. That is what this is. No matter how you might want to dress it up, talk about the numbers, you actually just want to attack migrants. You want to blame migrants for the lack of housing policy for a decade when those opposite were in charge. If you want to blame somebody for the challenges that we have around the housing crisis, all you need to do over there, One Nation, is look to your right. They're all on your right over there. For a number of years, they didn't even have a housing minister. Not a single housing minister. They've opposed demand measures. They've opposed supply measures. Anything to do with housing, they've opposed and got in the way, and they failed to do anything in the decade that they were in charge. But sure, punch down on migrants. Punch down on migrants. It is motions like the one before the Senate today that fuels hate and division in this country, that fuels the rallies like we seen yesterday that you're over there celebrating about, but actually lots of migrants in this country are living in fear right now because of. You're celebrating that, and it's an absolute disgrace. And if you can't see how your motion today and the words that you've used in this place fuel that division and hate, then you're delusional. Absolutely delusional. Australia's story is woven from so many threads. Sudanese nurses, Vietnamese grocers, Indian engineers, Lebanese artists. Migration is not a threat to who we are. It is a gift to our nation, actually. It brings flavour, it brings resilience, and it brings innovation. As a First Nations woman in this place, I honour the families who have crossed borders and oceans to build lives here on Aboriginal land. I honour them in this place. Their stories are stitched into our streets, our schools, and our hearts. Before any migration, before any colony, this land holds stories older than time. We are absolutely the luckiest of countries, the most successful multicultural country in the world, combined with the oldest continuous culture on this planet. And what a gift that is. That is something to celebrate, not to protest. This Labor government has zero tolerance for hate and discrimination in all its forms, and this is absolutely a continuation of that. We're a proudly multicultural nation, and every one of us, no matter our heritage, has the right to feel safe and welcome in our community. And motions like this undermine that. And I could absolutely stand in this chamber today and read out a bunch of statistics that reflect our balanced migration program. I could talk about our very sound management of the economy. That means that inflation now has a 2 in front of it instead of a 6. I could talk about those numbers, absolutely. But that's not what this motion is about. Absolutely not what this motion is about. It is about stoking fear and division. That's what it's about. Blaming migrants for the failure of the opposition to build homes over their decade in power. Blaming migrants for the lack of policy to help people get into their first homes by those opposite. And there's a little clue about what makes you think this isn't about migration specifically, because they've lauded the rallies of yesterday. If this was really about migration, then you wouldn't have seen people from the rallies yesterday attack First Nations people at Camp Sovereignty. We're not migrants to this country last time I checked. We're First Nations people. We've been here for 65,000 years. Those protesters somehow found their way to Camp Sovereignty. An absolute disgrace. So don't pretend that this motion is about migration. It's about racism. Absolutely. We reject any movement that erases or sidelines out of fear, like we've seen yesterday. Instead of stoking division, like some people in this place, the Albanese government is focused on bringing people together. That's what we stand for. We want an Australia that listens before it speaks, that welcomes before it judges, that heals before it divides. Not one built on fear, but on fierce love for country, for culture, for community. We stand for unity in diversity, for truth in history, and for futures shaped by care. This is not about politics, it's about people, and it's about the kind of nation that we want to be.
Senator Scarr has the call, and I'll come to you, Senator Whish-Wilson.
Yeah.
Senator Scarr.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I rise to support in relation to business of the Senate motion number 1. And there is no doubt that there are many people in our community who were extremely disappointed with the sight of neo-Nazis on the steps of the Victorian Parliament, disappointed with some of the signs that were used, some of the chants used by some over the course of the rallies that occurred yesterday. And I say that when we discuss these issues in relation to immigration, they must be discussed in a way that's considered, that's measured, and that is reasoned. And when we talk about failures, all of it is a failure of government policy. It's entirely to do with government policy. It has nothing to do with people who've come to this country in good faith. It has everything to do with governments of whatever persuasion at all three levels in relation to planning, building the infrastructure required, and in relation to coming up with the long-term planning.
Order. Please restore. Senator Scarr, you have the call. Please respect the right of Senator Scarr whilst he's speaking. Other senators.
Deputy Acting President. And I'd say to Senator Ayres, I'll take his interjection. I'd say to Senator Ayres, go back and have a look at budget paper 47 of the budget for October 22 to 23. Open up that page and have a look at your forecasts, the Treasurer's own forecasts with respect to net overseas migration, and take some responsibility. Take some responsibility, because this is what the Treasurer said in the Treasurer's budget paper number 1, released in October 22-23. This is what the Treasurer said. In relation to forecast, the net overseas migration in the 22 to 23 year, this was Jim Chalmers' forecast, 235,000. That was the forecast, 235,000. And what was it? Over 520,000. Over 520,000. And then in 2023 to 24, Jim Chalmers' forecast, the Labor government's forecast, was 235,000. And what was it? Over 440,000. Over 446,000. So two devastating pieces of miscalculation. What is going on in relation to the forecasting function within the Labor government? How do you explain that? 235,000, 2022-23, that was the forecast, and the number came in at 528,000. 235,000 for 2023-24, and the number came in at 446,000. So that's the first point I'd make in relation to Senator Ayres' interjection. The second point I'd make is this, that the Labor government still hasn't announced the 2025 to 26 permanent migration program. It still hasn't been announced. We're now in mid-August and they still haven't announced the immigration program, the permanent migration program for 2025 to 26. And this issue has been raised by the MIA, Migration Institute of Australia, because it's causing real issues to people who are seeking to take advantage of the skills stream, in particular the skilled independent stream, who have made applications, gone through processes, they're being advised by immigration agents, they're doing the right thing, and yet the government still hasn't announced the 2025 to 26 permanent migration program. So how about you take some responsibility for that? And how about you take some responsibility for this, that we received on 11 August 2025, the latest update with respect to onshore visa applications and processing in relation to humanitarian visas. Now, I know people are in this position who have applied for onshore humanitarian visas, and I always do my best to listen to the circumstances and provide assistance where I think it's appropriate, But let me say this to you, that on 5 October 2023, the Labor government released a strategy after beating up on the previous coalition government in relation to the numbers of the total number of individuals that were not granted a final protection visa that have yet to be deported at the end of the period. After tipping a bucket on the previous coalition government, and on 5 October 2023 saying they had a new system, they were going to fix it. So the number in October 2023 of total number of individuals that were not granted a final protection visa that have yet to be deported at the end of the period was 76,185. That was the number back in October 2023 when the then ministers, before they left the portfolio, gave a indication they're going to fix the system. We now fast forward to the latest figures that the Honourable Matt Thistlethwaite provided to this committee in relation to orders that were moved by former Senator Keneally from the Labor Party, who'd raised previous concerns in relation to this issue. And the latest figures we have is the numbers grown to 98,979. 98,979. So by October 2023, Labor said, we're going to fix it. We're going to fix it. We're going to introduce all sorts of measures to fix it. And it's now gone up from 76,000 to 98,000, which is 2,000 more than our annual humanitarian intake. 2,000 more. So take some responsibility for that as well before you throw accusations across the chamber, Senator Ayres. And let me refer to the migration. Let me also refer to the review of Australia's migration system, the discussion paper that was released in March 2023. March 2023, it was discussed. March 2023, it was released, the discussion paper. Let me give you some quotes from this discussion paper. Quote, our approach to migration planning hasn't properly accounted for the impact of large and uncapped temporary migration on infrastructure. We need a long-term horizon that supports more effective planning of infrastructure, housing and services to meet the needs of all Australian residents, end quote. Those aren't my words. Those are the words of the independent reviewers you appointed to have a look at migration strategy. And yet you've left a vacuum. You've left a void. You've left a void and extremists have sought to fill that void. So you take some responsibility, Senator Ayres. Your own review of the system back in March 2023 said, and I quote, and I absolutely agree with this, smooth and predictable migration enables Australia to plan housing infrastructure such as schools and hospitals, end quote. This was back in March 2023. And as Senator Pocock has mentioned, a vacuum has been left, a vacuum, a void. Page 42, if the supply of infrastructure and housing does not keep up with demand created by migration, the quality of infrastructure and housing services may deteriorate and prices may rise. That's on page 42 of the review document. Page 42, housing accommodation in particular is currently a major barrier to attracting and retaining migrants across all visa programs and maintaining a social licence for a large-scale migration program. That was in your own review document. That was in the discussion paper for your own review document more than nearly 2.5 years ago. More than 2 years ago. And then when the migration strategy was actually released, and it's now nearly 2 years later, this is what was said in the government's own migration strategy. There is insufficient regard for pressures on housing and infrastructure. Insufficient regard for pressures on housing and infrastructure. It also said we have a strong history of well-managed migration that supports rather than runs counter to our housing and infrastructure needs. It also said we have not had a long-term planning process that links with the levers that make migration successful, such as planning for housing, infrastructure and services. That's what your own strategy document said after the discussion paper. And this was released in December 2023. December 2023. And you've left the void. You've left the void. A better managed migration system can help to manage planned cities and revitalise regional communities. This also requires investment in housing and infrastructure such as schools, hospitals and transport to align with migration levels, end quote. Page 28 of the government's own strategy. Page 79, targeted and well-planned migration will support population planning and help deliver better outcomes for Australia in infrastructure, housing, service delivery and the environment. What's happened? What's happened? I want to quote Acting Deputy President from a very useful paper that was released by Emeritus Professor of Demography of the ANU Migration Hub at the Australian National University, and this is Emeritus Professor Peter McDonald. And I commend everyone to actually read this paper. I think it's got very, very useful data in this paper. And the paper asks the question how net migration can be brought down to an acceptable level more effectively. It draws a distinction between temporary and permanent migration. It says, I quote, and I'm going to quote extensively from this in my remaining time available. While not often stated, mitigating population ageing is one of the two main rationales of the Australian Migration Program. The other rationale is the filling of skilled labour shortages. I quote, for 19 successive budgets, including the 2024-25 budget, under 7 different Prime Ministers, beginning with Howard, the Australian Migration Program has been set within the narrow range of 160,000 to 195,000 per annum. The humanitarian program has added another 10 to 25,000 each year. This has been successful bipartisan policy. In 2009, Peter MacDonald and Jeremy Temple were asked by the then Department of Immigration and Citizenship to estimate the level of net overseas migration that would optimise the growth rate of GDP per capita through its impact on population ageing. The result provided was in the form of a range, 160,000 to 220,000 per annum, thus confirming the level that had been applied by successive governments. Importantly, MacDonald and Temple demonstrated that there was diminishing returns to scale as the level of migration increased, its relative impact on the growth rate of GDP per capita fell. Above 220,000, net migration served to increase the population while doing little to mitigate population ageing. As stated above, successive governments have maintained the size of the permanent migration program within this range, and it seems that they've been satisfied that the skilled shortage rationale has been fulfilled adequately by applying the 160,000 to 220,000 range, end quote. This paper also then raises a number of issues in relation to the relationship between net overseas migration and the size of the permanent migration program. It also deals with issues in relation to temporary visas and whether or not there's been a practice of people on particular temporary visas engaging in visa hopping. And it's also raising an issue with respect to, and I want to quote this, by far the largest category of new permanent residents, about 100,000 per annum, are partners. Partners are skilled immigrants in the skilled stream and partners of Australian citizens and permanent residents in the family stream who are not tested for their skills. And so it goes on. So I really do commend that paper to those who are listening to this debate in particular and who want to obtain a greater appreciation of the relevant issues in relation to Australia's migration policy, because I found it incredibly helpful. In conclusion, I do not support blaming immigrants or migrants in relation to the issues we're facing today. I do not support it. I think it's wrong. I think it's divisive. I think it tears at our social fabric. I do support having a reasoned, considered debate in relation to the issue. I think we need to have that debate. As I've said earlier today, if the debate is not had, extreme elements will fill the vacuum or seek to fill the vacuum, and that's something we must guard against. That's something we must guard against. And it grieves me, it genuinely grieves me that we're in the position that we find ourselves in today over the course of the day. So in relation to that issue, we are moving an amendment, and I've moved the amendment in the name of Senator Cash, calling for an amendment to the resolution, because we simply cannot support a resolution which does not make it clear that we're talking about government policy. We are talking about government policy, and we should be very, very careful in relation to the framing of these discussions to include any words that could in any way send a signal that people are actually to blame when they come to this country.
Senator Whish-Wilson, you have the call.
Thank you, Acting Deputy President. I must say, very considered contribution by Senator Scarr, and he's absolutely right that immigration is not to blame for any housing crisis in this country or a lack of affordable housing. It is government policy broadly that we need to look at. The immigration hasn't caused our national housing crisis in Australia, contrary to what you'll hear from One Nation in here today, and contrary to the message going into the rallies in Australia on Saturday and coming out of those rallies, that somehow immigration was responsible for a housing crisis in this country or a lack of affordable housing. That's just more lies and deception in an age of rampant disinformation. Lies and deception deliberately spread, peddled by those with agendas, designed to divide us, distract away from what has really caused a shortage of housing in Australia, and ultimately protect those who benefit the most from economic inequality in our country. The millionaires, the billionaires, right-wing conservative politicians and extremists. So what is responsible then? Decades of policy failure by lazy and captured governments who won't reform taxation in Australia or planning laws, and who continually ignore underinvestment in much-needed affordable public housing supply. 1% of taxpayers in Australia own 25% of our investment properties. I'll let that settle in. 1% of Australian taxpayers own 25% of this nation's investment properties. And according to the 2021 census, and we've got a new census coming up soon, over 1 million homes in Australia were unoccupied on the night of the census. The homeless census numbers, the way it was defined in that census, was around 125,000 Australians. That's nearly 10 vacant houses for every person living on the street. That's because tax concessions reward speculation and land banking, and ultimately the most wealthy in our country. The Greens are worried about the housing crisis in this country too. We all should be. We've had endless discussions in recent years on how to fix this. But don't point down and beat down on our nation's most vulnerable people, when we should be pointing up to the politicians who aren't doing enough, and the billionaires and the millionaires and the rich property developers who benefit the most from this debate. The kind of scapegoating witnessed in here today and on the weekend are these rallies that gave platforms to neo-Nazis not only endangers our community and cultural identity as a multicultural nation, but it serves those in power who benefit the most from our broken system. And we can fix that. We can do that in here, and we can do that together. So I say put the politics aside that are dividing us. Let's come together and let's fix this problem.
I call Senator Ananda Raja.
I am exhausted as a migrant to constantly have to justify my existence in this country. I've been here for 40 years. I came to Australia when I was 12, and here I am at the age of 52 as a parliamentarian in the Australian Parliament, having to prove my Australianness, having to prove it. And I'm wearing, for goodness sake, a sprig of wattle on my lapel today. Why? Because it's National Wattle Day, the 1st of September, a day to celebrate our unity, diversity, and our resilience. And why wattle? Because there's over 1,000 species of wattle, and wattle is one of the most resilient plants in our landscape. It can withstand fire after fire after fire, and it blooms. It comes back stronger. And it's a bit like the story of waves and waves of migrants to this country. Since World War II, every wave of migrants, from the Greeks, the Italians, the Jews, the Vietnamese, and now the South Asians, for those, that's Indians, Sri Lankans, Malaysians, people of color like me, have had to be resilient because they've all encountered xenophobia, all of them. But you would think that over this passage of time that we would evolve, we would get better as a country. And I do truly believe we are better as a country. But in this chamber, some days I have to question that. And today's one of those days. If there was ever any doubt that the coalition, the Liberals and the Nationals, have moved to the hard right, that was dispelled today by their actions and their words today. For years, they've been flirting with the fringe, for years. But today, they got into bed with that fringe. And I've seen this movie before. I've seen this movie play over and over again. My sister, Senator Stewart, First Nations woman, knows exactly what I'm talking about because First Nations people have had to endure this since colonization. So normalized for them, but it's not normalized for me. It's not normalized for me. It shouldn't be normalized for any migrant in this country. Cultural diversity is under attack. It's under attack all around the world. There are some places where migrants, even though they've stayed in their country of birth, laid down roots, raised children, are being detained and locked up. Some are being deported. Some are being deported. Now, that anti-immigrant sentiment may have been normalized once upon a time in our history. And that history wasn't that long ago. It was completely normalized when the White Australia policy was operating in this country. Now, that was revoked in 1973 by a Labor Prime Minister, Gough Whitlam. And since then, successive governments, Liberal and Labor, have actually embraced multiculturalism. It's been a pillar of our national economy. Multiculturalism is now woven into the fabric of our country. So once upon a time, it was probably okay, historically, to attack diversity. It's certainly not okay now. Not when 1 in 2 Australians have either been born overseas or have a parent who was born overseas. I'm not here anymore to justify my existence, to prove my Australianness, to constantly wonder whether I belong or whether I'm pretending. I am here. I am Australian. I am a member of this federal parliament. So I don't have to prove to any of you over there that I belong. I belong, is what I'm saying. And I stamp my foot down and I say I belong. And I will wave that Australian flag. What I saw on the weekend was a betrayal. It was disgusting to see what they did to the Australian flag. The flag that our diggers fought under against Nazis. So sure, we should be able to have a rational debate about migration. Sure, we should be able to do that. But rationality goes out the window when it's co-opted, when that argument is co-opted by neo-Nazis. When anti-immigrant sentiment is the business model of one nation and now the coalition. This place turns the dog whistle into a megaphone. And the people who are impacted are not people like me. It's not me. It's the little kid who's going to school. The kid who wears the hijab. The little Indian kid who plays footy on the weekend or cricket. Their parents. Those people who don't have the voice of Senator Nandaraja in the nation's parliament. Those are the people who are impacted. The words spoken in this chamber ricochet around this country, tearing at our social fabric, and the words get fired here. And the impacts are not felt by anyone in this chamber because we're too privileged. But it is acutely felt by people outside, in those communities right around the country. To weaponize migration is beyond the pale in 2025. We are here. We are part of this country. We contribute. There isn't a single facet of our economy that doesn't depend on the blood, sweat, and tears of immigrants. You can't walk into a hospital or an aged care facility or a childcare facility or any business without seeing migrants. They hold up the sky. It's like the United Nations. Hospitals are like the United Nations. So are aged care facilities. So are childcare facilities. And guess what? If you don't have any of those essential workers, key workers, your economy cannot function. You can't actually build the homes that we need. Because the people who are building those homes need people, other people, to look after their children while they are working. Those IT workers who come from places like India, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and so on, underpin every single business and government agency in this country. Take them away, everything grinds to a halt. So be careful what you wish for, One Nation. Be careful what you wish for. You go out there and you blow that dog whistle, and the only people who get harmed are all of us, our country. But you're right, we should be able to have a rational discussion about immigration. Because you're right, there aren't enough homes. But there aren't enough homes not because of migrants. There aren't enough homes because governments, successive governments over the last 40 years have not been building enough homes. It's been utterly neglected. And it caught up with us over the pandemic. I'm exhausted. On the weekend, colleagues, my daughter decided to go into the city yesterday in Melbourne. And I begged her, I pleaded with my 20-year-old daughter to not do that because of what was going on the streets of Melbourne. I do track my daughter on her phone. She doesn't like it, but I'm a helicopter mum. I make no apology about that. And I did that, and I constantly watched her to make sure she was fine. And then I messaged her. And then when she was on the train, she messaged me and she said, "Mum, some of these neo-Nazis are on the train." And I was like, go and seek help. Go and sit next to someone of authority. Go and find that person. She was fine. This is 2025. This should not be happening in modern Australia. So there were people at these rallies who have legitimate grievances. They are concerned about housing. We as a government take those grievances seriously, and which is why we are pulling every lever imaginable to solve the housing crisis. So many pillars to that portfolio, most of which were actually voted against by the coalition, who stand here and cry crocodile tears and blame migrants while still holding up housing supply. They voted against the Housing Australia Future Fund. They voted against Help to Buy. They then tried to move a disallowance motion last week into Build to Rent. Every step of the way, they have blocked passage of housing supply. So don't come in here and pretend that we've all suddenly had amnesia on the Labor side. We haven't. But the bottom line is this. The coalition love to pump up the tires of migrants and multiculturalism. They turn up to immigration, to citizenship ceremonies. They turn up to festivals where they might eat a samosa or wear a turban or have a shawl put around their necks, right? That's multiculturalism, isn't it? Little do they know that migrants think that they are, deep down, a nasty party. A nasty party. Because deep down, migrants know that the coalition, the Liberals and the Nationals, don't really like them. And that's evident on their benches. Where are the migrants? Where are the people who look like me? I was the member for Higgins. I was the member for Higgins. Senator Collins is putting up a hand. Senator Collins, I would love to look like you, but I don't. I don't. So the Liberals and Nationals, you need to take a hard, long look at yourself. You've just been had your backsides handed to you on a platter by the Australian people. They've rejected the direction you're moving in. You need to course correct. You need to listen to the people. Move back to the centre. It's important for this country that we have a decent opposition. It's important for this country that we have an alternative government, an alternative party that is worthy of government. But if you're not able to do that, then people like me will happily come and take your seats. And once we've finished with the Liberal seats, we'll move on to the National seats. And once we're finished with the National seats, we'll move on to the One Nation seats. Because all those communities have grievances that only a Labor government is addressing. Stop using migrants as a political football. Migrants are not the problem. They are part of the solution. If there is a problem with infrastructure and housing, then let's, as a parliament, work collaboratively and solve that. Thank you, President.
Thank you, Minister. The question is that the amendment moved by Senator Askew. Question be put. All of that opinion say aye. Those against say no. I think the ayes have it. Division required. Well, the division will happen tomorrow if it is required, given that we've passed 6:30. Nation, are you calling a division on this? Yes, okay. So the division will be deferred to tomorrow. Correct, good. I now call the clerk.